I'm sure you've been walking down the street and you see countless people dressed like this. This style is often described as alternative, which is traditionally defined as any aesthetic that exists outside the influence of a mainstream or commercial fashion. Yeah, that doesn't add up at all. If this style of dress is meant to be anti-mainstream, why does everyone wear it? And perhaps more importantly, why does every fast fashion brand on this planet peddle alternative clothing like it's the new latex gold rush? Well, in order to understand that, we first need to understand where alternative fashion came from and how the style of countless different subcultures got homogenized into one overtly insecure stew and slapped the label of alternative. Although the alternative style could technically stem from countless aspects of cultural history, in terms of the clothing we most commonly see draped on insecure influences today, we have to look towards punk. Even though it does pain me deeply to say, punk did not originate in the UK, and the same can be said for the style of dress. Much like our rich history as a nation, we did just simply find something mildly interesting and yoink it for our own benefit. But hey, at least the British Museum goes hard. Punk stemmed from a revolt against the commercialized garage rock within New York. In the 70s, a bunch of crusty-ass musicians and poets began crowding around clubs like CBGB, playing a new, distinct, aggressive style of music, and most importantly, dressing in a certain type of way. Figures like Patti Smith and Richard Hell began breaking down the barriers of what fashion could even be. Skinny trousers, messy hair, deliberately torn shirts, and androgynous elements. It was a new and interesting look, sure, but it connoted a lot more than just rusty-ass safety pins stuck into fabric. It was an aesthetic that connoted a rejection of the typical fashion conventions. They wanted to look scuffed because it melded with the message, sound, and culture they were trying to push. And speaking of sound, if you are listening to the music of Patti Smith, Richard Hell, or the Ramones, it's unlikely you are using a scuffed-ass record player like in the 70s. You're probably using some form of headphones. And that brings us to the sponsor of this video, Raycon. So you finished stuffing your fat gob over the Christmas period, it's probably time for you to use some of that crimbo wonga to upgrade your tech. And I know the vast majority of you crusty individuals only really listen to music, so Raycon is perfect. Personally, I've used the Resolution Cope to get back into fitness and meditation, and audio is a huge part of both. I've been using Raycon's essential open earbuds for binaural beats and ignorant training music, and it's been a game changer. As opposed to blocking out all the noise like traditional earbuds, these Raycons allow you to be aware of the world around you, the soft chirping of the birds perhaps, the screaming of the gym cell. I can consume content without losing my awareness, which keeps me safe and focused. They are comfortable, lightweight, have 36 hours of battery life, and the ergonomics of the earbuds specifically help with my activities. I have weirdly freakish ears, so the hooks allow them to stay in even whilst doing this. Safe and comfortable regardless of how your ears may look. The essential open earbuds are here to help you with whatever goals you may have. Go to buyraycon.com/CoolierOpen to get 20% off site-wide. And once again, thank you for Raycon for making these videos possible in the algorithmic hellscape we live in. Alright, back to the video. So if the style originated in New York, how did it become so commonly attributed and aligned with the UK? Well, during this period, there was a wolf prowling the streets of New York. A pretentious British wolf that had been tirelessly searching on how to monetize subcultures for years. This man was Malcolm McLaren, the eventual manager of the Sex Pistols. He absorbed the visual language of punk in New York and shipped back to the UK, where he started boinking Vivienne Westwood. Although the relationship wouldn't last long, as Westwood is a queen and McLaren is a rat, the melding of ideas and I'd only assume fluids resulted in the progression of the punk style. Westwood is responsible for much more than designing necklaces for chav girls to wear in the UK. She is essentially credited for inventing the punk style that is still seen on the Shein homepage today. When McLaren got his filthy little mitts on the Sex Pistols as their manager, he started not only utilizing outrage as marketing within a politically fucked England, but dressed the budding stars in clothing from Westwood's boutique named Sex. It's called Sex. Oh fuck it, that's like, it sounds like a joke, but it's just called Sex, man. If you're even the slightest bit aware of the Sex Pistols, which you probably are if you watch me, if not, you can watch this, but you probably know the story from here. They break into America, go global, the style becomes commonplace through various cities, and Sid Vicious does something very silly, very silly, and it's not playing bass badly, it's a bit more dark than that. The death of Sid in '79 wasn't just the death of a bassist that couldn't play bass, it was the death of what punk fashion had connoted previously. The industry took the style of anti-fashion fashion and sold it as just quite literally fashion. But this wasn't true alternative yet. It was a section of what it would become, sure, but there are a few other subcultures that got thrown into the commercial blender and eventually combined into a 12-pound sheen corset, with perhaps the most prominent being goth. Punk splintered into post-punk, which allowed for more interesting sounds and subject matter outside of "I hate the Queen, she's probably a lizard." It resulted in the birth of goth with Bauhaus's debut single Bela Lugosi's Dead, which was named after the iconic film actor from the late 20s who is most commonly known for playing Dracula. So the style of early filmmaking that Dracula fits into was known as goth, inspired by the Victorian literature. There's a long lineage back. The Goth Girl paradox explains it. But the genre name was obvious based on the inspiration. Believe it or not, it was not directly inspired by the Visigoth barbarians that led to the fall of Rome. Although there is a loose connection there which I go over again in the Goth Girl paradox. The music was essentially Edwardian Gothic literature in audio format and quickly began to infest the UK underground in the 80s. Bands like The Cure and Susie and the Banshees rocked a style that combined punk rock anti-establishment with Gothic symbolism, creating what is commonly known today as the trad goth style of dress. The only reason it's known as trad goth and not just goth is because that terminology has been adopted by these motherfuckers and perhaps more accurately the bogans that continuously sexualize them and still do to this day. I know your game. I can see. I know you. Susie Sue became the goth mother, and no, not a fucking Hinge pickup line. A woman who was atmospherically influential upon fashion and culture, specifically the goth fashion and culture. Androgyny and sexual elements became a key section of the style, inspired by Westwood's prominent use of fetish wear. Although indeed sexual, the clothing was a way to protest and take back the sexuality that is now prominently pushed onto them by short-form social media and the loose promise of big fat stacks of cash. These sexual elements were combined with Victorian and Edwardian styles to create goth mummy boom boom cocky. So we have goth and punk. What else can be considered alt fashion in the modern day? Well, there's no point really going through all of them because I do have separate videos on most. Instead, just think of an alternative subculture from the past. I'm certain that whatever pops up into your overstimulated brain has elements of its style commonly used within alternative dress to this day. The stripped back and everyman approach of grunge, which was inspired by broke musicians who got all their clothes from thrift stores, that's alternative. The rockers that wore leather jackets because they were cheap and durable, you best believe that's alternative. Whenever anything is countercultural and convenient for lost youths searching for a connection through subcultures, the message very quickly gets lost in translation and the aesthetic is commercialized for shmoney. So when did these styles get combined into the overarching term alternative? Well, truth be told, underground subcultures had been barreling towards mainstream meddling since the emergence of punk in the late 70s. Some could even suggest that the process did begin with punk, as there is an argument that it was commercial from the very beginning. Many people will point towards grunge and the influence of Kurt Cobain, and I do agree to a point. The fact that this stylish individual was plastered everywhere in an aesthetic that was intriguing, different, and forward-thinking definitely did help. But I truly believe that the late 90s is what gave birth to this label in regards to fashion. A time where nu metal and pop punk were battling for supremacy over the youth's brittle ears. A time where counterculture was the most prominent it has ever been in the mainstream through skateboarding and MTV. And a time where shops such as Hot Topic would start infesting every mall within America. And they only had one goal in mind: sell every teenager the alternative starter pack. Fuck man, how does this hurt more than the bath? Like, bro, hurts my back more than the bath. By the way, this is where I sleep now. Hot Topic was founded in 1989 by Orva Madden, who by all accounts was not alternative in the slightest. He was a business motherfucker and took full advantage of the cultural shift that began in the 90s. He noticed that MTV was plastering alternative music all over televisions, and therefore making it insanely popular for young people. But there wasn't a convenient store for kids to buy this particular style of clothing. He founded Hot Topic and began experimenting with the aesthetic of the storefront itself. He realized he couldn't sell this style in a space that resembled H&M. He had to commodify the aesthetic and atmosphere that was promoted through the music. Hot Topics all across America shifted from commercial stores with hospital lighting to dark, dingy dungeons complete with gothic gates that any budding goth mummy could walk through and engage in some delicious commercialism. It didn't stop there, however. Hot Topic famously reimbursed their employees for alternative concert tickets. But there was a catch. They had to return with a a fashion report. Essentially, Hot Topic had sleeper agents at every show, scouting the mosh pits and noting down what the DIY kids were wearing. Once the executives at the store had their filthy little mitts on this report, they could begin designing clothes and tailoring it to the trends extremely quickly. The subculture to fashion motherfucker pipeline shortened from years to about 8 weeks, truly introducing fast fashion within alternative. The thing is, Hot Topic's goal wasn't to shine light on the deep and varied past of these subcultures, they just wanted to commercialize the aesthetic. So it didn't really matter what styles they combined, just throw it all together, fuck it. As long as it's cool and appealing, that is all that mattered. This can be demonstrated by their approach to band t-shirts, which was known as the rock wall within their stores. As opposed to placing shirts in particular genres, they treated the rock wall as an overarching market for whatever was trendy. This may seem inconsequential, but to the average 13-year-old, the rock wall was just a huge display of quote-unquote alternative t-shirts. They were all the same. They were no longer a goth, punk, metalhead. They were just simply alternative, regardless of what the bands displayed or the sound of their music. The store continued to barrel towards commercialism with collaborations with Trip NYC and Lip Service. This introduced and ravewear into the store, with the intention being to sell these subcultural styles to people with an approachable price tag. These items of clothing that were historically uniquely crafted with cultural identity were now being cheaply mass-produced and spat onto storefronts, meaning kids all across the country were wearing the exact same items of clothing in an attempt to prove how unique they were. How ironic, and how times have changed. I think you can start to recognize how this style very quickly became homogenized. Hot Topic's grip on the cultural aspect of the 90s crafted the mall goth. For the first time, you didn't need to pick a particular subculture. You didn't need to subscribe to the ideas and immerse yourself within the community. You just needed some pocket money, a trip to Hot Topic, and you could fit into the overarching label of alternative. This quickly obscured the history of the clothes. You didn't need to know about the Batcave or the anarchist roots of crass. Just fork over $40, drape it over your disgusting body, and you are now alternative. Now give Hot Topic another $80 in exchange for some gentrified latex. Speaking of latex, I'm currently working on a psychology of the mall goth girl video for the Patreon. It will be out shortly. It depends my time frame and my brain. But there are various other pieces of exclusive content on the Patreon, so please check it out, thank you. Although Hot Topic was 100% responsible for this style's explosion, I do believe that their actions were inevitable. If it wasn't Madden, it would have been someone else. And that has a lot to do with how counterculture had shaped the late 90s. Grunge had already built the blueprint a few years beforehand. Nirvana was everywhere, sporting a style of dress that connoted poverty and scruffiness. Corporations noticed this and realized they could adopt a non-corporate aesthetic to make a fuck ton of money. So if this was already primed to explode, who pulled the trigger?
Nu metal.
Nu metal was a lot of things. It was hip-hop, groove metal, electronic, thrash, but it was also an entirely new thing altogether. The genre essentially took all the appealing aspects of countless underground sounds from the past and mashed it together in a way that was almost universally loved, and we can even see the effect of that to this very day. The style of dress sported by the most popular bands was no different. Frontmen sported clothing like Adidas tracksuits commonly seen in hip-hop, goth and industrial makeup conventions, and even skater culture with wallets, chains, baggy trousers, and snapbacks. Nu metal is confusing. Not only did all the major bands sound incredibly different, but also looked entirely unique from each other. Despite this, the term nu metal was used to make the bands marketable and primed for the mainstream, which combined each of these styles and influences from the past into what we know today as alternative. So if the 90s started the homogenization of subcultures into a singular aesthetic, what accelerated it to the point where it means nothing in the modern day? Like in the 90s, alternative people were still weird. It's not weird anymore. Well, it has a lot to do with the internet and how that's caused the coreification of fashion, which I might do a full video on. If you want that, let me know. I know I'm not like typically a fashion dude, but hey, the music niche is fucking dead. But what does the coreification of fashion even mean? You hear it slapped on everything. Cottagecore, Barbiecore, fucking clowncore, God forbid. Why does it all use the term core? Well, the suffix originated from hardcore punk. When that genre stemmed into other sounds, the community just used core to define it as a hardcore subgenre, much to the dismay of the artist usually. A key example is emocore, but that does not explain the fashion. Well, in 2013, a trend forecasting collective named K-Hole released a report entitled Youth Mode, a report on freedom. This acted as a sociological analysis of the culture of the time, specifically the youth's inherent desire to be so unique and alternative that they all ended up looking the fucking same. The collective argued that a concept known as Normcore was the only way to fix this conundrum. This defined the freedom of fitting in everywhere and refusing to use clothes to try and be unique, instead pushing a desire to connect with everyone through maybe maybe personality, God forbid. So that seems pretty good, right? Something must have gotten lost in translation for that to morph into fucking cottagecore. And of course, you have a dumbass alleged journalist to thank for that.
This journalist
wrote a piece named Normcore, fashion for people who realize they're 1 in 7 billion. The article completely missed the point of the original term and presented a new fashion aesthetic that involved generic clothes, complete with a fucking visual checklist. This misinterpretation was a goldmine for clothing brands because they didn't need to understand some sociological theory to make money. They just had to follow the checklist. This may seem like bollocks, but Gap literally launched a campaign named Dress Normal. It may seem like we are straying away from the topic of alternative here, but I promise this is all connected, as alternative in the modern day is just the new normal. And Normcore proves that all you need to do to remove meaning from the art of clothing is to form a commercialized aesthetic. The Normcore fiasco happened in a similar time frame to Tumblr's explosion in cultural relevance. The website allowed for aesthetics to be curated on highly specific blogs, which created further confusion in regard to what these aesthetics even were. Soft grunge, pastel goth. It was aspects of certain styles combined with aesthetics purely birthed from commercial fashion, and of course a complete lack of understanding of any historical relevance. I don't blame Tumblr, however. The style was already homogenized, and the website allowed for unique aesthetics to be presented with detailed explanations and passion. The same cannot be said for the current state of social media, which brings us to how short-form content has completely destroyed the concept of alternative. Platforms like TikTok have sped up our lives tenfold, and no concept proves that more than fashion-based trends. Subcultures in the past could live for years or even decades. Many are still alive today within small pockets, but nowadays most trends are shoved into a blender and become old news within less than a month. We are already aware of how alternative began to lose meaning as more genres and styles were introduced within the 90s. Well, imagine that, but 1,000 times the speed. When a trend is over within 2 weeks, it doesn't have time to create any identity or value within the subculture. It dies and immediately gets chucked into the alternative stew. When these values die, the only signifier on whether somebody is alternative or not is whether they spend the money and buy the relevant clothes. This isn't just some esoteric bollocks cooked up my own brain. 72% of Gen Z users report that they have been influenced by TikTok into making a purchase. Couldn't be me. Short-form social media kills meaning by design. Every idea has to be smashed into a 2-second appealing hook. If you don't comply, nobody will fucking watch. This means that values within these subcultures are buried beneath a sea of thirst traps and people sporting alternative clothing simply because they appreciate the way it looks on their body. Fine, but this is bound to create a snowball effect that in turn will get sniffed out by the wolves within the fashion industry. Enter Shein. Although the company presents itself as a fashion brand, that is far from the case. In reality, they just scrape through whatever's interesting or trendy within culture and create cheap lookalikes for each of these products. They do this at an atmospherically huge scale. Between July and December 2021, Shein added between 2,000 and 10,000 new styles to their app. See, that already seems like a lot, but it gets even worse when you realize that refers to what they added every single day during that period. The result of this is obvious. Clothing that was originally utilized to connote that you weren't a part of a particular system being turned into mass market profit. Taking back sexuality through clothing? How about a $17 goth corset? A statement against the political elites and conformity within society? Nah, just buy an $11 rivet bikini instead. The thing is, putting the entirety of the blame upon Shein insults the intelligence of the consumer. Surely if these items of clothing are unethical, vapid, and horrendous for the environment, people will avoid buying them. Well, in some cases yes, but for the most part, people choose to ignore this, and how can you blame them? Shein and other fast fashion brands have completely removed the idea of effort within subculture identity. You don't need to learn or even attend particular spaces. Instead, you are encouraged to buy the goth Shein clothing by overly optimized glossy figures on the internet. Somebody who somehow looks like Mewtwo whilst flaunting their corset over the trendy audio of that week. It's never goth music though. It never is. This encourages mimicry, and mimicry is the complete opposite of what alternative fashion should be. When everyone is following these same trends and buying from the same cheap alternative grifter, they all end up looking identical. That is obviously a massive oversimplification, and it's hard to cover everything here because this is a YouTube video. And I truly do believe the prominence of alternative is more than just people's desire to be different due to insecurity. Alternative dress looks cool because it stems from things that are fucking cool. All the subcultures that got thrown into the alt stew caught on and got homogenized because they represented things that were fucking wicked. TikTok is pretty bad, yes. But in terms of recognizing who you are and what you might like. It's almost too good. Which brings us to one of the few positives. The algorithm has introduced so many people to so much new and interesting art that they might have not found otherwise. Even if that's all chosen for us by clankers, it's hard to see it as entirely negative. Discovery has essentially been replaced by express delivery. We don't typically walk to a show to find our tribe, not usually. It's just shoved down our throats by algorithms, which then in turn encourages us to wear fast fashion latex that has been found to be chock full of lead and PFAs. So based on all of this, it's clear why alternative fashion is so fucked. It's no longer alternative anymore and has been spiraling towards the mainstream for decades now. There is a solution though. Since these fast fashion faux leather and latex clothes are full of so many alleged dangerous chemicals, perhaps natural selection will take out alternative instead. And I fucking dread to think what might replace it. So perhaps that is why alternative is no longer alternative. It was too cool for most of us to ignore. And maybe it's better if the new normal has immense amounts of swag as opposed to fucking tech pro quarter zips or like hood rich or some bollocks. So what should you take away from this video? Should you reject alternative altogether? No. Dress in the way that you want that aligns with your beliefs and personality. The main piece of advice I will give is to avoid fast fashion. These companies are taking advantage of you for their own financial gain and causing catastrophic damage to the environment as a result. If you're an interesting person with values, you will seek out the meaning behind the art you consume and drape over your body. So it's not my place to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. So yeah, lace up the corset, put on those huge platform boots, drape that leather jacket over your shoulders. Perhaps one day we can create a huge alternative army where each person is indistinguishable from each other. At the very least, we'll all look swag. So that's my yap over. Stay schizo, move in silence, stick to your beliefs, and of course, I will see you in the next video.